Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Welcome to our first weekly Ummah session. Because this is our first session, inshallah, I'll give a breakdown of what we expect to do and what we aim to achieve. So the purpose of this weekly Ummah is basically to catch up and gather our thoughts about what's happening with regards to the Muslim Ummah in the past week. Because we're starting from today's our first one, we'll be going back a few weeks, inshallah. See what's been happening in the Ummah, in India, in Kashmir, in Syria, in regards to East Turkestan. Inshallah, that's the aim of this weekly podcast. It may not be weekly, but inshallah, just stay on our page and inshallah we'll update accordingly. So the first things first is let's talk about what's been happening, what's happened this week. Well, on this day, I don't know if you're aware of a boy called Hamza Al-Khatib. You may have come across him, which we posted on. He was basically a 13-year-old Syrian boy who took part in a protest back in May 2011, and because at the time there were peaceful protests, the Syrian regime, the Assad regime, wanted to brutally stop this protest, and one of the tactics they used was to kidnap children. And Hamza Al-Khatib is a unique one because he was the one who was tortured to death basically by Assad's forces in 2011, in May 2011. And basically you can only imagine what they'd done to him. They tortured his body, they put two bullet holes inside of his arms. He had bruised eyes, his genitals were mutilated, and in the end they sent his body a month later. They sent his body back to the family, and that's what prompted, you could say, the armed revolution. That incident was the one that the Syrian people rose up against Bashar al-Assad. So he's an important one. Not many are aware of this, but this boy, Hamza Al-Khatib, I mean, he'll be forever remembered, and is basically what prompted the Syrian revolution. We keep hearing about Guantanamo Bay. In all honesty, Guantanamo Bay is far more better than the prisons in the Middle East or in the Muslim world, unfortunately. If you're aware, the CIA have a rendition program where they send Muslim prisoners to these countries, Syria, Egypt, Libya even, where the Muslim prisoners get tortured that if you were to hear about them, you would probably you get goosebumps. You're basically you cannot even imagine it. So when the torture takes place in Muslim countries, because it's so brutal there, not many people hear about the Muslim prisons there. They are forgotten. They can do what they like with them. You're talking about rape. You're talking about, it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a man, child, woman, girl, or the elderly. It doesn't matter who you are. They'll just brutalize you, and that's a tactic used to scare the opposition or protests that take place in across the Middle East, especially in Egypt and Syria. I mean, Syria is known. Even Bashar al-Assad's father, Hafiz al-Assad, it goes back decades. The system in the 50s, in the 40s, in the 60s, the prisons there are known to be brutal. That's why we have the CIA and rendition program. That's where they send them, because in the West you have accountability, in the East you don't. That doesn't exist. So that's one story that we wanted to highlight, was Hamza Al-Khatib, a Syrian boy who was tortured to death basically. Another one incident that took place in India was the 22nd of May. It's known as Hashimpura massacre, 22nd of May 1987, where 50 Muslim men were rounded up, taken by the Indian police. They were taken outskirts in Hashimpura village near Meerut city, and they were basically put on a truck and then they were shot at point blank range, and they were thrown in a canal. And you know what? Even since then, since 1987, they've been trying to fight justice for the perpetrators involved, and it's only been in 2018, I believe, 16 former officers were sentenced to life in prison. But that's not really justice, is it? But yeah, the massacre that happened there in India is basically. We'll talk about that in a bit, what's happening in India. So what else has been happening this week? Well, in Kashmir, during Ramadan, we've had a 13-year-old Kashmiri boy. His name's Basim Ajaz. He died in Srinagar, in hospital in Srinagar. Basically, what happened was the Indian army or the security forces had an encounter with militants, and because it's in a populated area, the Indian army basically indiscriminated and basically destroyed 15 homes that belong to normal Kashmiri civilians who have nothing to do with one side or the other. And this boy was killed. Well, they say he was killed because the building collapsed, his house collapsed on him, and he was taken to hospital, and he succumbed to his injuries the day after. He's one boy that passed away in Ramadan, basically a victim of Indian brutality in the region. We've also have another Kashmiri. His name's Peer Mehrajuddin, and he was killed on the outskirts of Srinagar. He was basically he was fired at whilst he was going to study to college. He was on his way to college, and his family say that he was shot and basically brutally killed. No different to what's happening in Palestine when an Israeli kill a Palestinian civilian at checkpoints. They call it checkpoints, but we all know that these checkpoints are just a way to control the people. It's another strategy of occupation, and he was another one that was killed in Ramadan. Again, sticking to India at the moment, because a lot of is happening there. I don't know if many of you were Dr. Zakir Naik. Basically, the Indian government, the BJP-led government, have asked the Malaysian government to basically extradite him back to India, and they really want to. They had this discussion last year with the Malaysian Prime Minister, but they made a formal request. It's during Ramadan. They made a formal request. We don't know what the Malaysian government have said in response, but we've contacted many people. We told them, stop this. Do not listen to this request, because if he goes back, there'll be a lot of dhulm against him. He'll be imprisoned unjustly. There's a conception there, the perception that Dr. Zakir has a citizenship in Malaysia. I don't think that's true. That's people have said this on social media, but I don't think that's true. But they should give him citizenship, and so that nobody can touch him outside, basically. But ironically, the point was when Dr. Zakir Naik mentioned himself that last year, after after the lockdown of Kashmir, he basically, the BJP-led government sent an envoy to Dr. Zakir Naik in convoy. In Malaysia, and they basically asked him. They basically bribed him in a way. They told him, "Look, if you support our campaign in Kashmir, we will basically drop all the charges. We will reinstate all your assets, and he will allowed to come back to India." But obviously, what does that tell you about the charges they made? Even the Interpol agency have rejected India's request, for arrest warrant. So therefore, the charges don't make up. They're trumped up charges that, which is happen very frequently these days, just to silence somebody and to imprison them unjustly. Another thing, what's happened on Eid Day, in Somalia, four children were killed basically on Eid Day after a mortar shell. After a drone strike by the US hit their home. After the missile hit their home, a number of people have died and their mother was injured. That's another ongoing region where America, even during the lockdown, they haven't stopped all the military activities across the world. Just because there's a lockdown across the world doesn't mean that the military are stopping their activities. No, they're carrying on as if nothing's happening. So the US is still continuing its war on terror, which is basically war of terror, and basically, they don't even know why they even targeting these places. Again on Eid Day in Afghanistan, same thing in Afghanistan. Another 4 children were killed after a mortar shell hit their home in Laghman province, and basically the locals are blaming the Afghan army. Some people say, how can the Afghan army, how can the Pakistani army, or how can the Palestinian army, or any army in the Muslim world, how can they not, how can they attack their own people? Well, basically they do, because the West tells them to do. So the Afghan army, with the help of America, they tried to attack Taliban, but in fact killed many civilians, and they noted to have killed many in the past, especially in the last 2-3 years. They killed many civilians, Afghan civilians, and they have always having protests going on. So for that family, 4 of the children were killed. There were 2 girls who basically had a henna on them. Basically they were celebrating, on Eid Day. It's a joyous occasion, so they wanted to celebrate Eid, but then a bomb lands on their home, which is all too common in the Muslim world, unfortunately, whether it's in Syria, Kashmir, Yemen, Iraq. No matter where you look at, it's the same kind of story, to be honest with you. Apart from the Uyghurs, we'll talk about the Uyghurs in a bit. There's another, again back to India. There's a British Muslim called Suhail Hughes. He was detained, just before India announced the lockdown. He was basically went on a holiday and to visit the masajid in the Gujarat state, and when they announced the lockdown, many people panicked, and obviously they wanted to return home. But with this brother Suhail, they basically took his passport away. They seized his passport. They denied him appeal. He's been imprisoned since, and they accuse him of spreading coronavirus. And what the funny thing is, they repeatedly testing him, and it always comes out negative. This is how the joke the system is there. And basically the family are trying to get the British authorities involved, politicians, embassies across the world, to ensure that he returns home. We have a link, actually. If you go to our on our page, you'll see a link to the petition. So please, if you get a chance, please click on that, sign the petition. It'll be very beneficial. At the moment, does anybody have any questions at all, or let me see. Where am I based? I'm based in the UK. So if you have any questions, I mean, by all means, you can ask. Go ahead, ask what you like, and inshallah we'll try to answer. There's a comment here, brother. I feel that this is all because Judgment Day has to come. All happenings are just a source for Qiyamah. Well, that's true, but it doesn't mean that we just sit there. We have to do something. We have a role to play. The hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, he said, if you see munkar, if you see evil, change it with your hand. If you cannot change it with your hand, you have to speak out about it. If you can't speak out against it, you have to at least have it in your heart, be against it. And that's the lowest form of iman. We all have a play to role. So it's not all, oppression is not something unique. Oppression has always been there. I mean, it's been throughout our history, with all the prophets. With they had to go through suffering in order to learn the lessons. And there's many examples in the Quran as well, especially Bani Israel. I mean, if you look at it, the similarities between us and them are not much different. I mean, we when the followers of Prophet Musa, when they said to him, you go and you fight with Allah, and we'll come afterwards. Basically, that's our mentality today. We have the same mentality. Oh, brother, you go and do it, and then inshallah, when if you need something, then we'll come and assist you and aid you. That's not the thinking we should have. We should be forward thinking, have the foresight, do some work. No one's telling you, because we can only do what's within our means and capacity. And if you know your limitations, look at the next best thing that what you can do. Why do the Indian and Zionist governments hate Muslims so much? Well, it looks like everybody hates Muslims at the moment, unfortunately. The Zionist government is basically they want to expand the Israeli state. The Indian government, as Dr. Zakir Naik said, Islamophobia is epidemic. It's epidemic in India. Lynchings over the past few years, lynchings have increased. Muslims being targeted just because you're seen to pray. You get accused of being coronavirus. You're spreading coronavirus. This mentality is basically dehumanizing. When you dehumanize a community, basically what you're doing is you're basically saying you are worth less than an animal, so therefore I can do what I like to you. So that's the mentality. That's why even in the West, the anti-Muslim in the media, the politicians and so forth, that's where all the hatred comes in. And the idea is to dehumanize. I mean, when Hitler came to power, he didn't just come into power and straight away. No, for years, for decades, they tried to dehumanize the Jews. And we're basically 1930s here, but on a much more wider scale throughout the whole world. we're basically the new Jews, basically, and I don't think that's gonna change anytime soon. Yes, I run this page. I mean, I run this page with my wife. Alhamdulillah, she's a really great support in this work. This is somebody who I consult with, somebody who I take counsel with, advice from. But yeah, it's depending on which platform you look. I mean, we got Urdu page, Bangla page, Arabic page, Kurdish page, and a French page. But they are mainly on Facebook, and they have a different team which we communicate with. But yeah, it's me and my wife. So, how do you verify information? Well, since we started in 2014, early 2014, we've been we started, obviously when you start off something, you're not gonna have much with you, but over the past few years, we've established reliable contacts, alhamdulillah, from across the globe, with regards to the Uyghur community, with regards to the Muslims in India, even in Kashmir, in Syria. I mean, but certain news information like Syria and in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, and Yemen, and all these places, the information is not, it's not hard to follow. I mean, they're quite easy to verify. It's not really hard. You go by what the locals say, you go by what the independent news journalists say in that region, and then you look at what the mainstream media do, and then you look at the truth. The truth is somewhere in between. Well, the purpose, the reason why we started this, I mean, we mentioned this before, and we'll mention it again. The reason why we started this project is because, over the past 2 decades, right, there's been an increase in oppression. Bosnia, Chechnya, consequences of the war on terror, which killed over 2 to 4 million people in Iraq, Afghanistan. Then you have civilians killed in Pakistan because of the drone attacks. Then you've had Egypt happened, where they tried to remove, they removed Hosni Mubarak, and then now Sisi. Then we had President Morsi in, and then he got toppled. Then we've had now we got Sisi, who's basically annihilating any opposition, whether you're secular or or whether you're a practicing Muslim, or even a non-Muslim. To be honest, he's cracking down on them so brutal that people who support him, they are regretting it. They're regretting it now. But the point I'm trying to make is, since this increase of oppression, someone out there needs to document it, and this is the point of the project. The point is to document what's happening, because the mainstream are not doing it. The mainstream media are not doing it. And when I mean documenting, I mean we Muslims have our own narrative. This is important. This is very important. Until we have our own narrative, as in we, sometimes when the West posts something on, basically, just say there's an airstrike happened in Syria. The Western media likes to tend to put their own spin to it. So they'll say, the Russian warplane attacked Idlib, but they are rebels. They are rebels or jihadists in the region, therefore justifying, basically in a way justifying that airstrike. Um, so this is the reason why that we as a Muslim, we need to have our own body in terms of media, and this is one of, we're only specifically doing oppression, nothing else. Petitions don't get any results. I've signed so many. Uh, no, I disagree with you. I totally disagree with you. Petitions do make a difference. It depends where you are. In the West, they're a powerful tool. You'll be surprised. It'll be debated in Parliament, especially in the UK. So if you have a petition and you sign it, it makes a big difference. But because we live in social media world, things travel fast across the globe, and therefore social media and petitions are very good tools to promote, basically get the politicians to act or say something or do something, because not doing anything is not a solution. You're not doing anything. You can't just simply say we're gonna do dua. I mean, we've been saying that for the last 60, 70 years, and just by simply doing the dua is not enough. Is not enough, I'm afraid. Your information about Afghanistan is definitely correct, but indeed the authorities of Afghanistan are paid by the West. To be honest, this is how the West controls the Muslim countries. I mean, they allow dictators to stay in power, even though they may be anti-West, like Bashar al-Assad. They'll make sure they stay, these dictators, in power for a number of reasons. Number one, the natural resources that are in Muslim world, especially in places like Saudi Arabia, in the Gulf countries, even in Afghanistan, the minerals there, the natural resources. That's one thing to control. The population is basically allow the dictators to rule. It's basically an easy thing for them, and they rather have a dictator who kills all his people than a Muslim one who has who's principle like Mursi. Number two is they want us to remain in this situation where we're despondent, where we're always oppressed, so we can't be we can't further ourselves in basically technology, in economy, in science, in literature, in all these areas. In these areas, if you look at the poorest people in the Middle East, the average person in Egypt earns $1 a day, less than $1 a day. And if you put those people in that situation, obviously you're not going to raise thinkers, you're not going to raise reformers, you're not going to raise people who will make an impact in society, whether it's to do with army, technology, science, you name it, Islamically, anything. It's all intertwined. So basically, that's the reason why they get the Muslim countries to do the job for them, and that's the reason why we're still in this situation today. Until our own situation doesn't change, we cannot fend off the West, unfortunately. Sorry, I'm just going through the comments. Do you think Muslims can do something, or is it too late? It's never too late. Look, whatever's destined for us as Muslims, whether we be oppressed, imprisoned, our families be killed, whatever, it's never too late. The only way it's too late is basically when the angel of death comes to you and takes your soul away. That's the when it's too late. But until then, nothing is too late. The real reason for Islamophobia in India is because of paid media. They've ruined our unity. and diversity, completely. You got to yes, that's correct. You got to understand the media plays in any society. The media plays a huge role, and the right wing media, especially whether you're in India or in the West, the UK or America or Europe, uh, this Islamophobic industry is actually quite huge, and they get lots of money. The people, the likes of Tommy Robinson, they get lots and lots of money. They get paid huge amounts of money by far right people in the West, and Zionists, to spread hatred against Muslims, even though deep down they know it's not true. But they're getting paid at it, and they're getting paid for it at the end of the day. And also, you know, when a country is going through a disaster and they're going through problems, what's the first thing people look at? Let's blame the immigrants. Let's blame the other people. Let's blame people who come to our country. And unfortunately, that's the case. So when the economy goes down, let's blame the people. Let's blame the immigrants. If something's not going right for them, let's blame the immigrants. And unfortunately, it's a very easy thing to do nowadays. I mean, we Muslims do that ourselves actually, against other Muslims who are not from our own country. We do that ourselves. This nationalism, this disease of nationalism, and the era of nation states. It's being tried, and it will die down. And basically, nationalism is what killing us. What's your opinion about India? I think in India, if Muslims do not get their act together, unite, and actually confront the Islamophobes in the country, be expecting massacres. You've seen the massacre in Gujarat, and all the massacres throughout in the past few decades. And because Islamophobia is at its peak now. I mean, you've seen what happened in Delhi, the anti-Muslim pogrom in Delhi just before Ramadan. I mean, earlier in the year, and basically 50 people died. Most of them were Muslims, and you're gonna see that. Frequently. Muslims need to get together. They need to work together, and they need to stop. Burying their heads in the sand. If you're gonna bury your head in the sand, you're not gonna achieve nothing. You just want to ignore that there's an issue, and that's not the way you're going to deal with things. I mean, seriously, they need to get together and actually do something. Whether it's self-defense. I mean, especially the youth. That's a must. Every person has a right to self-defend their property, their wealth, their families, etc. That's one of the first foremost things that should have been established by the Muslim community in India. They have been in certain areas where they've been doing it, but it needs to be on a more mass scale. Especially, you have hundreds of millions of Muslims in India. Unfortunately, how would you expand to get more support? Alhamdulillah, we have a lot of support in the community, even from scholars as well. They see that there is a need for this, but I think the next aims is to do these kind of videos to basically open a bit more up and get more things done politically. What I mean by that is lobbying MPs, lobbying politicians, getting more protests, etc. These are the things that are needed now. But initially, when we first started, we had no support. People looked at us as if like we're a conspiracy, and some still do have that thinking where, that we're a conspiracy to something. We're not. And I mean, you could go back and research about us on Google. We've been here since 2014. Please post this conversation on your account. I missed some points. Yes, inshallah, after this, inshallah, tomorrow or the day after, I will post it on YouTube, inshallah. How are the conditions in Muslims in the UK? The well, conditions of Muslims in the UK is pretty good compared to the rest of the world. Obviously, whether you in Kashmir or India or in the Uyghur community or other areas where where there's basically war going on. Here, we can't really complain. But having said that, the rise of anti-Muslim sentiment is rising high, and I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. I mean, this is as a whole in the West, especially in Europe. The rise of the far right is increasing every day, and they look at any excuse to blame Muslims. Also, another thing I would like to highlight, and inshallah I will close soon, is you got to read. You have to read. I mean, that's one of the things in doing this work is we have to read. We have to read about what's happening. We have to read about different people, like the Uyghur community. You have to read about them and understand the history, understand what's happening, understand what culture they have, what language they have. You got to do your reading locally and nationally. That's very important. There's an intellectual warfare going on in Afghanistan. Well, this psychological warfare has been happening for the last 300-400 years, even before the Ottoman Khilafah was abolished. This psychological warfare has been happening, and since especially in the 40s and the 50s, practicing Islam was seen as something strange in the Middle East, especially in Syria, because that came the rise of Arab socialism or Baathism. They saw that that's the way to move forward after the Khilafah was abolished. During that period, many people were frowned upon. If you prayed, if you wear hijab, if you practice Islam. Then in the 60s and the 70s, and there was more people trying to become more practicing, and becoming be good Muslims overall, and but they've always trying to clamp down on these people in the Middle East. I mean, in Syria, people used to say that if you were to pray in one mosque in Jamaat, in congregational prayer, you'd have to go to a different masjid to pray in Jamaat. Why? Because you'd be followed by security services or the security agencies. That's how it was then, and that was like decades ago. But yeah, this psychological warfare is to break you. It's the battle of hearts and minds. It's to get you to leave your deen. It's to get you to be focused on other things, that there are different alternatives to your life problems, as opposed to Islam. So yeah, this psychological warfare has been happening for a very very long time, and it's reached a point where they have achieved quite a lot actually. Many of us are scared. How many of us, you know, our names are Muhammad, we want to be called Mo, because our colleagues in workplace are majority non-Muslims, and it's best for them to call us Mo instead of Muhammad. Like, these little things have a huge impact of one's outlook in life and your mindset. And in order to train your mind, you gotta free your mind from this shackle that that you're always looking, and you're always ducking and diving. You're not really looking at what's your main point. If you stick to the deen, you stick to what Allah and His Rasul have said, and you do the best. We're all gonna make mistakes, we're all gonna sin, and we try to be good Muslims, then inshallah we'll achieve a lot. But this psychological warfare will always be there, and that will never stop. I hate when you post something and in the comments people are asking for sources when it's well known. Unfortunately, brother, uh, this is the case when Muslims do work. Unfortunately, when we get together, we do some work. Unfortunately, we get questioned a lot. Many doubt us. Even if we post something and it's also posted by the mainstream media, they won't question them, but they will question us. And we have no problems in giving the sources and the links, etc., etc. But it becomes over a period of time, it becomes tiresome in doing that, and it becomes, to be honest with you, it becomes annoying. But the same individuals who say, you post fake news, you don't post this kind of news, you're always posting, you know, etc., etc. These people won't question the mainstream media. I don't know why, but maybe we have this thing where we always have to look at Western media run by non-Muslims who we think they are more, you know, they have more ethics or they have more morals than us Muslims do. Allahu alam, I really don't know why they have that mindset. Patriotism over nationalism, I suppose patriotism is correct. Look, the Prophet ﷺ said, yeah, what is asabiya? The Prophet ﷺ forbade asabiya, basically tribalism, nationalism. It's a disease that it makes us look at other Muslims who are not from our own culture, who don't have the same color of us, who don't speak the same language as us. We look down upon them as if they are aliens, and this is why we are in the situation that we're in today. How many times have the Rohingya Muslims, when they've been to in the refugee camps, how many racist comments are against them? In even refugees in Malaysia, I mean, we had comments calling them dirty, filthy people, in reference to the Rohingya. I mean, if this is the attitude that we have, don't be expecting anything to change anytime soon. And that's where the concept of Ummah is only limited to our own family, our own village, our own city, then our own country, then our own sect or group, and then a full, and then I don't know. It's a disease that keeps on dragging us down, and we're not moving away from that. And then we see oppression happening. For example, the Syrian refugees on the border on Turkey. I mean, we do get a lot of hate comments when we mention like a Syrian boy being shot at by Turkish soldiers, and the child dies. I mean, when we report that, we get a lot of hate comments. Like, I mean, you're gonna understand, right? The Sahaba, the Sahaba, especially when Umar and Abu Bakr, when they became caliph, what was the first thing they said to the people? That if you see anything that I did wrong, please correct me with the sword. Now these are the two companions promised Jannah. So, is your leader better than the Sahaba? I mean, this is what we have to think about. Are your leaders, not accountable to anything? And people get really riled up for some reason when we mention a crime taking place in Pakistan, or in certain areas of the Muslim world, or even in Saudi. Some people get really offended, and for some reason they go on a nationalist rant where they talk about, what did we did this for you. That's not the point, whether you did this for us or this for that. If a crime has taken place, a crime has taken place. And if you don't get rid of that nationalism, don't be expecting the Ummah is going to change. Why are you so against Saudi? Why am I against so Saudi? I don't know what that means. But if highlight, this is referring to the other question. If talking about Muslim prisoners being being sent to jail in Saudi Arabia, I mean, is that speaking out against Saudi? I mean, if that's so, then yes. I mean, how can you not talk about when Saudi is bombing Yemen, or when Saudi arresting like Mohammed bin Salman? He's been arresting under his leadership. They have arrested hundreds of scholars in the last two alone, and these are Saudi scholars who support the regime. So, for some reason, I don't know why you think that just because a crime, we speak out against a crime, we're against Saudi. I mean, I don't know what that means. And this is where it comes back to the other question: is your king better than the Sahaba who are not accountable? Because Sahaba counted them accountable. They would used to ask. A woman traveled thousands of miles to Umar ibn Khattab to ask, about the situation that she and her family was in, and Umar Khattab started crying. But for some reason, when we talk about the oppression in Muslim countries, we get saying, "How dare you speak about this, etc., etc." As if they god them, as if they are gods, which obviously they're not. You're not supposed to go against Muslim leaders, right? Again, this is one of the tactics used by a certain element within a community. I mean, I didn't want to go into this, but since you mentioned it, um, if you're gonna go down that route, then you'd have to speak out against the Sahaba when they spoke out against Hajjaj ibn Yusuf. So you have to call them out and attack them. You have to stick to your principle. If you think that this is your principle, that you can't speak out against Muslim rulers, what about the four Imams when they were arrested? Imam Ahmed bin Hanbal. So when the people came out on the streets, you know, you could say protesting against, against the arrest of Imam Ahmed bin Hanbal, were they going against the ruler? I mean, this doesn't make sense whatsoever. Stop taking the leaders as your as your shahada, because, and also another thing is, you can't compare Muslim rulers of the past to this present situation, because if you look at the rulers today, you're basically comparing apples and oranges. I mean, you're talking about people who don't implement Sharia. You're talking about rulers who don't care about their own people, don't implement the Sharia. The dhulm that they have on the people, and if you look at even tyrants like Hajjaj bin Yusuf, he at least protected people within the Caliph, within under his rulership. Sorry, I'm going through the comments here. Where do you get your sources from? I've explained this before. We've established contacts for the past few years, alhamdulillah, reliable contacts from the Uyghur community, etc., etc. And based on that, we collaborate, and that's how our sources come about, especially with regards to the Uyghur community and what's happening with them. And that's how we come. That's where our sources come from. What are my thoughts of China and India? China is an oppressive state. They're not they're not allies of they're not your allies. They're not your natural allies of Pakistan. I mean, if you think they're your ally, you really need to read up on how they control the economy of Pakistan. China and India, they're both oppressive. They have similar things that they want to achieve, like concentration camps. I know India wants to do the same with regards to the NRC, the Islamophobic, anti-Muslim citizenship law. They basically whoever's not, and they're specifically targeting Muslims. I will see that they're already building concentration camps in Assam state, so they'll be no different to China. The you know, and I know they'll be having skirmishes and across the border, but let oppressors fight oppressors. Let them fight each other. So are you saying that we should take swords and attack the leaders? Are you okay? In what part did I say that you can do that? I never said that. Just because you're highlighting oppression takes place, it doesn't mean that you're advocating for rebellion or of some sort. I mean, you can't conflate the two, and it's really unfair and unjust for you to throw that when you know that we're only talking about the oppression that's taking place. Okay, inshallah, I'm gonna leave it there for now, and inshallah, next week or I'm hoping to do another one, maybe the week after. But I'll be bringing on guests from India or the Uyghur community, etc., depending on what's happening. And inshallah, this is just the beginning, inshallah, and we'll hope we'll do justice to what we're doing. And please remember us in your du'as that we can continue doing this and achieve our goals. And anything good is from Allah. Anything of the mistakes that I've said is from myself. And please don't forget the Ummah in your du'as. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.